The new trailer for A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is here, and the tone of it suggests an entirely different kind of show from either Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon. George R.R. Martin's Westeros is a gritty, oftentimes brutal world where the common people are ruled by what he terms bastard feudalism, where there is a clear class hierarchy based on blood and family. If you are not fortunate enough to be born into nobility, there's little chance for you breaking free of serfdom. A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms looks at how a combination of luck, opportunity, and making the most of the little that you have can prove an exception to this. Both A Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon are rooted in the royal and noble families of Westeros. They concentrate on the desire for power and of the political manoeuvring of people close to the Iron Throne. Both are also steeped in the magic of George R.R. Martin's world. A Game of Thrones ended with the invasion of the White Walkers, a zombie-like army who wait until the realm has been ravaged by war and winter before their invasion forces the living to unite in trying to defeat the dead. And these walking dead are the forgotten, subconscious force that lurks deep in the depths of Westeros, a magical cold darkness that remembers the crimes of times past. House of the Dragon focuses on the other magical force in Westeros, the one that arrived 200 years before the setting of the A Song of Ice and Fire novels. The Targaryen family invaded Westeros in order to escape the collapse of their own native land, and they brought with them 3 giant fire-breathing dragons that brought the nobility of Westeros to its knees. House of the Dragon starts early in the Targaryen reign, where a succession crisis sees these magical creatures become the main weapons in a cruel civil war. A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms sets itself in a far more humble setting. Set between the timelines of these other 2 series, dragons are now a thing of the past, but the Targaryen family have a secured dynasty in place. However, without dragons, their power is not what it once was, and so their presence at a grand tourney includes the Crown Prince and many of his Targaryen brethren as they remind the nobility of Westeros of their prowess. And the show will begin with a young squire burying his master, a hedge knight of little renown who was due to compete at this same tourney. The squire is Dunk, a young man who is rescued from the poverty of King's Landing by Sir Arlan of Pennytree, who as a hedge knight had no lands or wealth, but who made a living through offering his knightly services to the lords of the kingdom. Sir Arlan is shown to be a good man, who takes his knight's vows seriously enough to choose who to serve based on whose cause he believes in, or so he tells his young squire. When Sir Arlan dies, Dunk has to choose his own path in life. He has inherited all his master's belongings, which amount to everything you need to be a hedge knight, but not much else, as well as the legacy of what it means to be a true knight. And crucially, Dunk will claim that before his passing, Sir Arlan had strength enough to knight Dunk, and bid him to carry on his legacy as an honourable hedge knight. This is the only life that Dunk knows, and so he vows to compete in the tourney himself, and prove his valour amongst all the other knights of the realm. And this will be the theme of A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. What does it mean to be a knight? Chivalric code dates back to early medieval Europe, where a set of knightly ideals were popularised in medieval literature such as King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. But in reality, to be a knight you had to come from a noble and wealthy family, and so this knightly code could only be attributed to amongst the most privileged in society. This is only partly the case in George R.R. Martin's world. In A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, we will see the vanity, snobbery, and even incompetence that can be a feature of knights born from noble blood, but it will also explore how the knight's duties of defending the weak and fighting for a just cause can raise a man from the most humble of origins to eventually be named Lord Commander of the King's Guard. And so the tone of this series will be one of hope and adventure, where we follow Dunk of Fleabottom as he becomes Sir Duncan the Tall. Showrunner Ira Parker alluded to as much in the New York Comic Con last week, as well as its setting in the most humble parts of Westeros. The dark, desaturated imagery that's come to define the final seasons of A Game of Thrones, as well as House of the Dragon, has been spurned. In its place, we see a vivid landscape of rolling hills and untouched natural beauty. And this is how I think the show will be most different, in that it taps into a part of George R.R. Martin's writing that never really gets spoken about. For all his gritty use of fantasy and magical realism, George R.R. Martin at heart is a romantic who believes in the ideals and beauty within culture, society and nature. Never has this been seen quite so clearly as in the 3 novellas that make up A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. Dunk is a romantic ideal, a hero who fights for what is right with an unspoiled integrity, and who travels through the Seven Kingdoms in wide-eyed wonder as he grows into adulthood. Some scenes from the trailer even take on the appearance of a painting by someone like J.M.W. Turner, a 19th century artist who turned the English countryside into an expressive, vivid landscape. The Romantics were obsessed with the Middle Ages, and with chivalry in particular, and so it is not by chance that this series taps into their visual language. The trailer is also quick to dispel itself of any of the more magical or fantastical elements of the other shows set in Westeros. There is no threat from the north, and the only dragons we see are those crafted for an elaborate puppet show, as well as on the armour of the Targaryen princes in attendance. And these Targaryens will be humanised in a way that we haven't really seen in other shows. Any signs of the exceptionalism that come with their dragon heritage will be seen as a sign of madness, and in Baelor Breakspear will have a member of royalty who is surprisingly in touch with the common man. But the real driving force of this show is the relationship that forms between the main character of Dunk and Egg, the bald stable boy who he meets along the way. Whilst Dunk is cautious, humble, and unsure of his place in the world, Egg is confident, cheeky, and has no scruples in speaking up to those many years his senior. Although being just 8 years old, he proves to be wise and intelligent way beyond his years. And we see a small passage in the trailer that has Egg admonishing his master for fawning over men assumed to be his betters. This exchange is not taken from the pages of the source material, but it is very much in line with its themes. Together they make for an endearing couple. Dunk agrees to take Egg as his squire for the tournament, but finds that he has to continually remind the boy of his place. He frequently threatens Egg with violent reprisals for poor behaviour, but he never follows through. This first instalment of A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is based on the 1998 novella entitled The Hedge Knight, and in this we see Dunk's internal monologue show admiration towards his squire's boldness. It makes Dunk more bold himself, and it motivates the feats of valour that will become a feature of this series. And the trailer reveals that this show will be faithful to the source material in other small but interesting ways. Details like Dunk appearing at the tourney in rough-spun clothing, and with a belt made from string, are clear indicators of just how out of place he'll feel in the company of proper knights. The glimpses we have from the Trial of Seven shows Dunk setting off on a horse a few paces behind the others, calling back to a memorable passage in the novella, where for a split second Dunk forgets everything he knows about being a knight at the very point where his life depends on it. But there are some differences too. The previously mentioned puppet show was a low-key street performance in the novella, whereas in the trailer it shows it as a lavish production, with the dragon an almost life-size replica. And in casting the actor Daniel Ings as Lionel Baratheon, we'll have the Laughing Storm present in all 6 episodes, with a much larger part in the action than we see in the novella. It seems that he will form more of a personal connection to Dunk, reminiscent perhaps to the way that Tyrion formed a relationship with Oberyn Martell ahead of his own trial by combat in A Game of Thrones. And this is the clearest indication yet to the lighter tone of this series. Daniel Ings as the Laughing Storm, as well as Sean Thomas as Raymond Fossaway, are overtly comic actors being cast in major supporting roles. We can see that there will still be the grit and tension of the first novella, probably aided by the nighttime joust between Aerion Targaryen and Humphrey Harding, but also the sense of celebration and festivity that comes with the huge Westerosi tourney. These were events that brought the common folk together, and that gave them something and someone to cheer for. The showrunners seem to have taken particular inspiration from the life of a Hedge Knight. This knightly comradeship that's defined all of the Dunk novellas is very much in evidence in this trailer. And in Duncan the Tall, we have a lead character that it is impossible not to root for, and who displays none of the moral greyness that George R.R. Martin's characters are famous for. Dunk is as close as you'll get to a pure soul in the A Song of Ice and Fire novels, an ancestor and precursor to Brienne of Tarth, who knows nothing of privilege and has to earn every accolade given to him. And yet the message in these novellas is that to be a true knight, you specifically do not do so for personal gain. Upholding your knightly vows for accolades or earnings becomes the antithesis of Duncan the Tall. Every time Dunk is called on to put himself in harm's way, he does so because it is the right thing to do. A defining detail of each tale will be how he rejects gifts, titles, and even offers of service to maintain his own ethical code, holding a mirror up to those of the nobility who strive towards the very opposite. It is a largely thankless undertaking, but one that adds some welcome soul to the cruel world of Westeros. This series might be down in the dirt and sleeping under trees, but it is in these places where you find the best of people. Game of Thrones ended in a mess of its own making, sprinting to a blockbuster ending that completely ignored the driving force behind the series, which was the question of what brought about the coming of the others, and what humanity should learn from it. House of the Dragon seems to have invented a new narrative around the Song of Ice and Fire that takes the Targaryen civil war away from the tragic death of magic that you see in The Princess and the Queen, and largely reduces it to a personal battle between two wronged women over who will sit the Iron Throne. Where A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms can truly flourish will be to remember its romantic roots, to base itself in the good of man and the idealism not only of its hero, but of its author.